Mike tells a story about the time he was driving his old Ford, cruising down a deserted highway in the heart of rural Texas. The road was the infamous Old Route 666, a path rumored to be cursed, though he didn't know that then. He was headed to the distant town of Amarillo to attend the wedding of his best friend David. Since it was his first time in the area, he was relying entirely on his GPS. The air was heavy, stifling, and the sun dipped below the horizon earlier than expected. Suddenly, the pavement ended. He found himself in the middle of a barren wasteland, surrounded by nothing but jagged yucca trees. The windows began to rattle from a sudden, biting chill in the air. His headlights barely pierced a few meters ahead. The surrounding darkness was absolute, like driving through a sea of black ink. Fear began to seep into his heart, and he felt a strange shiver down his spine despite the Texas heat. Every hour, Mike would send his location to David via WhatsApp just to stay safe. In his last message, a voice note, he asked, "David, I think this GPS is leading me to hell. I'm on a pitch-black dirt road. Is this right?" David's reply was instant and unexpected. It was a brief text, just one sentence, but it was enough to make his skin crawl. "Mike, do not stop the car. Get off that road now. Turn back. They are waiting." At that moment, Mike froze in terror. He didn't understand who they were, or why David sounded so panicked. In a split second of mindless instinct, he slammed on the brakes. He tried to call David, but the signal had vanished. His phone was now nothing more than a useless piece of metal. The silence was eerie, the proverbial calm before the storm. He could hear nothing but his own ragged breathing and the low hum of the engine. Then, in another moment of poor judgment, he rolled down the window and reached his hand out, holding the phone high, hoping to catch a bar of signal. That's when he heard it, a sound that wasn't human, nor any known animal. Heavy, labored breathing right next to him, and the sound of rapid footsteps scurrying over the sand. Before he could pull his arm back, something lunged with savage ferocity. Something with skin as coarse as a crocodile's and long, razor-sharp talons. It clawed deep into his hand, trying to drag him out. He screamed in agony, yanked his arm back, and rolled up the glass. Blood was splattering across his clothes and the seat. His entire body shook as if he were having a seizure. He couldn't see anything outside, but he felt dozens of eyes watching him from behind the yucca trees. He tried to start the car to flee, but as they say, man proposes and God disposes. The engine sputtered, letting out a dying mechanical groan before going silent. He sat there for hours, completely defeated. The pain in his hand made him drift in and out of consciousness, waking only to the sound of scratching on the metal outside. Then he heard human footsteps approaching from the front, steady, rhythmic steps. Strangely, even though the car was sealed tight, the footsteps sounded terrifyingly clear, as if the person were walking inside his very veins. Suddenly, someone tapped on the driver's side window. The pale face of a man appeared. He looked like a farmer from the 1940s, dressed in vintage clothes, his eyes completely dull and lifeless. Terrified, Mike lowered the window just a crack. The man spoke in a thick, rural dialect, his voice calm yet chilling. "Lost, are ya, son?" Mike felt a surge of hope. He told the man he was lost. His car had broken down, and he was trying to reach his friend David's wedding. The man introduced himself as Sylvester and asked Mike to pop the hood. Mike had no other choice. He pulled the lever and Sylvester stepped out. Within 3 seconds, the engine roared to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. Sylvester claimed to know where David lived and offered to guide him. He sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, never once looking at Mike. He wore a shawl that wrapped around his head and neck in a strange fashion. Mike could only see his eyes in the shadows. He took an unnervingly long time to answer any question, as if he were translating the words in his head or seeking permission from someone else before speaking. They drove for what felt like forever, following Sylvester's directions, until Mike saw hanging lights and heard a strange music in the distance. "That must be the wedding," Mike exclaimed. They got out and walked toward the house, a decrepit, blackened wooden structure from the cowboy era. But the music, it wasn't normal. It was a poisonous melody, a frantic, unsettling rhythm that made his heart race for no reason, played on instruments he couldn't recognize, looking as though they were carved from bone. They entered the house, and Sylvester vanished into the crowd. Mike looked around and gasped. Every single guest was dressed identically. Tattered black, vintage suits, with shawls covering their heads. Only their faces were visible, gaunt, gray, and heavily wrinkled. There wasn't a single woman in the place. He searched for David, but couldn't find him. He decided to head deeper into the house to find the host. Inside, the place felt medieval. Stone walls and a dampness that choked the lungs. He went up to the second floor and found Sylvester sitting in a semicircle. The people around him were dancing in a hysterical, unnatural way, their heads jerking at angles that should have snapped their necks. Suddenly, their clothes began to fall away, and Mike saw what his mind refused to accept. Their bodies weren't human. They were covered in thick black fur, smelling of rotting corpses. Their feet were massive animal hooves, and their hands ended in long, wicked claws. He wasn't among humans. He was in the middle of a gathering of Jinn or cursed entities of the wilderness. He bolted for the door he came through, but it was gone, replaced by a solid wall. He ducked into a small room that looked like a bathroom to hide. There he found a massive creature with the head of a dog and glowing red eyes, panting as it stared at him. He turned around, gasping for air, only to find Sylvester standing there with a horrific grin. "Enjoying the wedding, Mike?" Sylvester whispered. "You're a demon. Get away from me," Mike screamed. Sylvester let out a laugh that shook the entire house. The ceiling began to crumble, massive stones and bricks raining down. A heavy stone struck Mike's head, and he lost consciousness, certain that this was the end. When Mike finally opened his eyes, he was lying in the middle of an isolated, ancient graveyard, more than 5 miles away from his car. An elderly, terrified groundskeeper was the one who managed to wake him. Mike told him everything. The old man began to weep and said, "You're lucky to be alive. This area has long been known as the Devil's Desert. No one enters and comes back whole." When David arrived with the police, he said he found the car exactly where Mike had stopped it, with the phone lying on the ground. But the questions haunt Mike every single day. How did he get to that graveyard? What truly happened during those hours at that cursed wedding? And the blood on his hand was real. Yet when he looked, the wound had completely vanished. The trauma lives on inside him. He now knows that there are some weddings where we, as humans, should never be on the guest list